good, everybody? It's Reed and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going over an awesome force. We're going over my handling on the spread force. The spread force is a very strong force. It's forcing a card in the act of, the classic spreading a card and having the spectator touch one. This is not the classic force. The classic force is something different that also uses the spread, but this is a spread force. So it is a surefire force, unlike the classic force, and it's a really great force. I love to use it. My handling is different, not something that I've seen too often, but there's a lot of similar ideas that other people have on this force, and so this is my way of doing that. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the video. Alright, it's time for a quick demonstration. I'll take the Jack of Hearts and we'll place it somewhere in the middle of the deck. So I'll just have you make any selection. This one, no, keep going. This one here, yeah, alright, and it is the Jack of Hearts. Alright, it's time for some exposure. So we'll take the Jack of Hearts, we'll place it on the bottom. I'll just have you select any card. And you can stop wherever you'd like. Let's say you stop on this card right here. I'll actually show it to you, and it is the Jack of Hearts. Alright, so the spread force. Spread force is a great force that uses the spread to hide the action of the force. Now you can start with the force card on the bottom of the deck or the top of the deck, and even in the middle of the deck. But I'd recommend you start with it on the bottom. It is the more difficult way, but it's also the more deceptive way that looks the fairest and is the most invisible. Now I will go over how to do it from the top and the middle in the other uses section, but for now I will be teaching with the force card on the bottom, which I highly recommend that you learn how to do it this way. So the spread force utilizes what's called culling cards, and in this you're basically stealing cards from the spread as you're spreading through and culling them underneath the deck, and then that way you can shift them invisibly to either the bottom or the top of the deck, right? So for example, if you're going through the cards and you see you want the 4 of spades, you can call that, keep going, take the ace of spades, call that, and then when you close the spread, you have now controlled those 2 cards to the top. So it's a very useful technique. So how this works is, as you spread, let's say we want the King of Hearts here, okay? So underneath, your fingers are going to contact the back of the King of Hearts. All right, so just contact it with 2 or 3 of the bottom fingers, the index, middle, and ring. Then your thumb needs to come and touch the card across from the king. So in this case, the 5 of diamonds. Because what you're going to be doing is pulling that card underneath the spread. But as you can see, if you just pull like this, the whole spread's going to close. So if you contact the 5 of diamonds and then begin to pull, the spread stays intact and just the king comes underneath. So again, contact with the thumb, the opposite card. You can actually bend the spread up a bit, and that'll help you get your fingers in there for the cull. So once you have made contact and you begin to cull the card, the goal is to have that card clear the packet that you're holding in your left hand, if you're right-handed. Once it's clear, then you can pivot that card, kind of open it up by just releasing your fingers, and then that's how you can slide it to the top of the deck, right? So as you're going through, you pick the cards in your mind, 10 of hearts, you contact the 2 of hearts, and then you cull the 10 of hearts to the point where it clears. And now you can hold it here and keep spreading cards underneath it. You see how as I'm spreading, the cards are going underneath the 10 of hearts? That's what you want. You want the cards to go underneath that. And you're just basically holding it open like this. Now you don't want it to drop down like this so you see, but just a small opening. And if you tilt the deck down at the right angle, kind of again at the facing their eye line, they won't be able to see anything. And now if we see another card, right, like the 6 of spades, we contact the 9, and then it's a little more difficult, but our fingers are going to reach over the 10 and start to pull that 9, or that 6 rather, into the sort of the same position. So now I have 2 cards down here, right? And now that I have that, I can just continue spreading, and that's how you can keep culling, right? You cull another one, kind of work it into that position, and then you keep spreading, and when you're done, you're just closing up the pack and letting those cards fall on top, squaring up, and then you will have your culled cards at the top. So that's the principle we are using for the spread force. So to get into position, right, as you're going to spread, first of all, you want to keep that bottom card concealed, right? You don't want to flash that the card's on the bottom and then force it to them, because someone might say, well, that card was just on the bottom, how did I pick it? And it's also just suspicious, right? So keep that deck face down, you know, do whatever control you got to do to get that force card into the position that you need it. If you're forcing a card at the beginning of a trick, right, and it's part of the setup, like the first thing you're doing is forcing a card, there's no problem with just kind of casually talking in the off moment, either between tricks or before tricks, finding the card you want to force and literally just putting it on the bottom, right? Don't let anyone see what card you're putting, but it's totally fine if you're starting a trick that way, just to set up by placing that card on the bottom. Of course, if you're doing a mind reading trick and it doesn't matter what card you force, you just quickly go like this as you're talking, as you're gesturing, peek that bottom card, and now you know what your force card is going to be. So I guess quickly how to spread cards I should go over. You're contacting the deck with the thumb of the right hand, and then you're pushing over with the thumb of the left hand, kind of one card at a time, and then the fingers are just falling underneath, holding the deck up. And as you get better at it, you can bring the hands further and further apart and use the pressure from the bottom and top packets here to hold more cards in the middle kind of in place. And that's what allows your hands to separate and you to get much wider spreads, right? Because my hands aren't touching. I'm just holding these middle cards using the pressure of these packs here. So step one, we start the spread, and just before it gets to the point where our hands are separated and the spread is really wide, what we're going to do is use the middle finger to come in between the gap, in this case between my middle and ring finger. That's the one I like to use. I guess it doesn't really matter which of these gaps you go in, but I think this is the most natural for the way I spread cards, right? We're spreading, and just as our hands are about to separate, we're contacting that bottom card, pulling in the middle finger and culling it, right? And then we're just going right, it's coming along for the ride of the spread. This is easier than culling from the middle because you don't have to worry about contacting the card over top or whatever. You literally just pull it along, okay? It's gonna take a bit of practice to get this to come square. Like, you want it to come square with the top card. You don't want kind of this to happen and you pull it out and flash it that you're pulling off the bottom card. So you want to get a bit of a spread going. You don't want to do it right away. And then you cull, right? Pretty invisible. And then you're just going to hold it in that cull position. Now you keep spreading, right? Wherever they, end up pointing to, you're just pushing cards underneath that card no matter what. So it's still here no matter what they say, right? One kind of tip is, as you're spreading, kind of slow down. Like, it's a little bit easier to do the replacement of this card when this pack's a little smaller. I mean, you can go all the way to the bottom, right? It's just a little bit more difficult. So again, we can try to kind of control where our spectators pick a card by kind of slowing down as we get, near the top half. And usually, if you say just touch a card, someone will pretty much touch it right when you say it, right? So you spread, you start to go, and you say, all right, just touch any card. Now they touch one. So let's say they touch this one. The biggest thing that you need to do is you need to ask, is this the one? Right? Is this one, right? Like, pretend that you're just making sure that that's the one. You know that's the one, but just make sure. I usually go with, is this the one? And just give it a little rub with the thumb, right? That's just indicating that you're sure it's this one, because they can totally change their mind. And if they do, you just keep spreading and then you get to another one. So what you're doing is you're just separating your hands by holding their card up with the fingers, and you still have that card culled underneath, right? And then this pack is just staying basically in a regular dealer's grip. We start to spread, they touch one, we say, all right, is this the one you want? Now our hands are separated, right? But we don't want to separate them a lot, and there's a reason for that. We're gonna need to bring the hands back together to help us with the replacement. So basically all we're doing is curling the fingers back and pushing that card over top of their card. Now, if you try to do this with one hand, you'll realize it's not possible. So you do need two hands for this, and that's one of the reasons why when you ask, is this the one, you don't want to bring the hands far apart. You don't want to go like this and then bring them back together. It's a little weird. So literally just lift it off a tiny bit and say, is this the one? Now, the second they say yes, that's when you start getting into the replacement. Your left thumb is going to come and contact that card that they say is theirs, okay? Your justification for this is because you're about to bring the cards up to show them. Just as they say yes, you're going to shift these bottom fingers from like this to in kind of this position, ready to kick that card over. Make sense? So I'll show that again. So this thumb contacts, these fingers curl and get ready to shoot the card forward. Now what you're gonna notice, when you contact this, that's all you need to hold these cards in place while you push this card forward. Right now the whole pack doesn't get messed up because you have that other point of contact with the left hand. Is this the one? We contact and then we curl the fingers. Now we're ready. Now we're lifting up to show them. And this is kind of the principle, a bigger action covers a smaller action. Because you can kind of see the hand make a movement, and you might even see the top of this card if you're not perfectly square. And you know, it's hard to keep a spread perfectly square all the time, so you need a bit of cover. So that cover is just coming as you're lifting the card to show them. Basically, the second they say yes, you contact here, curl your fingers, and then you start to push that card. And you want to replace it right on top of theirs. And as you're doing this, you're just bringing it up, right? And now it looks like the card they selected is the Jack of Hearts. Obviously, this one's not very square with the spread. And that's something that will help make this more convincing, okay? It's to have a nice square replacement. So here's some tips for that. As you make contact, you can now use this packet as a way to square the card. Because when you push the card, it'll just contact the packet and it'll stop. And now it is perfectly in line. You can see there's a double there. It's perfectly in line with that last card, right? So that's how you can square it side to side quite easily. Now, you got to be careful. You don't want to push the card forward over top again, and then when you show it's like off center, because obviously they're going to see that the spread was fairly straight, right? So it just wouldn't make sense. So that's just a kind of a practice sort of thing. Cards are spread. This one here, right? Then you show. Now, this force is great for getting a peek, because that totally justifies why you're keeping the pack here and why you have your hands together, because when you do a peek, you're using this pack to kind of shield anyone over there from seeing the card they're peeking at, right? You just give them a quick peek and then you close. Now, using this for a selection, there's a little bit less of a justification, but it still works. What I like to do is I come here, all right, I do the force, I show, and immediately, once I've used this pack to square, because this packet does help a lot, right? It really helps you to get that card square and line it up to make it look like it's the card they stopped at, right? You still have the spread, and now you're showing them what appears to be the bottom card of that spread. So the second I come up and that card is square, I start to bring this hand down. It doesn't really look like anything, like I'm just kind of bringing the cards up as my hands are coming apart. So it doesn't look suspicious that I just brought my hands up together, right? So that's kind of how I would recommend doing it in the case of a selection. You say, is this the one? They say, yeah, you go like this. All right, you got it, Jack of Hearts, perfect. I'll leave that there. And then you proceed with the trick. The problem for me with the spread force is normally in a spread, like, you're just gonna have them take a card, right? Anytime a magician tells you to point at a card, it's probably because they're trying to do something fishy. So yeah, obviously with this one, you still have to use the point at a card for it to work. And that's kind of the benefit of the classic force. But this is a surefire force, which is why I like to use it over the classic force. So really with this, the biggest thing you need to practice is that replacement, and the culling. You wanna make that look as normal as possible, just as you're bringing the hands up, right? And the spread pretty much stays totally how it was, and it looks very fair. It literally just looks like you're bringing your hands up. So if I show you at a bit more of a kind of regular speed, you'll see when I show you the first time, it's not the force card, right? But when I do the same motion, now it totally looks the same, but it is the force card. And it's just because I'm hiding that action while bringing the hands up. So subtleties for this, I've kind of touched on them a bit, but just asking that question, is this the one? That puts a little bit more of a sort of convincer in their mind that this is the one you're showing them, because you're just making sure, right, in their mind, is this the one you're picking? Really, this is giving you a chance to kind of get in position. You know, I'll say, is this the one? And then, you know, generally 99% of the time they're going to say yes. So you can, right as you say, is this the one, you can kind of bring your hands and get ready for the replacement. And getting ready involves, you know, putting the thumb on this card and curling the fingers. And then as you bring up, that's when you do your replacement. So asking them that little question really makes them feel like, okay, this is fair, right? This is the card that he's showing me. It's just a small little kind of mental subtlety. Asking, are you sure, is another good option, because that gives them, as always, the potential to switch. And anytime you're doing a force, you want to make it seem like they could switch. And this one, you actually can switch. Like, even if you say this one, they say, no, one more. Easily add one more, and then you come and you still do the force very easily, because you're culling the cards no matter where underneath that force card. So for body language, once again, you want to be natural. You don't want your hands kind of locked up, and you just want to make it look like a natural spread. The most unnatural part that I see people do when they do this is this first part, because they'll start to spread, they'll pause, do this weird hand motion as they cull, and then continue spreading. So you need to do it in one fluid kind of motion as you're doing the spread. You see how that looked? And then just continue spreading as normal, and then they pick their spot, and then you just go up and you show them, and it looks pretty normal. Be free with it, and do your best to make it seem like your regular spread when it actually is a free choice. Practice that, see what that looks like, and then just mimic that in the force. So for some other uses and ideas, there's quite a few with this force. So the first one, I'll show you a little bit of an easier method if you're not good at culling from the bottom. It can be a little tricky because most people tend to flash the card out the front when they do that. So you just need to be careful and practice pulling it evenly and quickly, and that'll help hide it. So I used to do it this way not too long ago, and it works totally fine. Just once in a while someone will say, oh, why did you do that? So what you're doing in this case is you're starting with the force card on the top, and all you're doing, you're literally taking that card, placing it in your hand, and then beginning the spread over top. Right, and now you're already in that kind of culled position. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, that looks super obvious, but no one ever really questions it, right? Like, you do it in an off moment, you just kind of go here and you say, all right, I'll just have you touch a card. And at this point, everyone's focused on touching the card. They don't even question why you took a card into your hand. I've seen a little bit better of a way where people pull off a few cards and they say, all right, I'm just gonna have you pick a card in a second. And that still works because their card's still on the bottom. I haven't really found that works well with this force though, because when you go here and you go to replace, you have this whole bunch of cards, like you have like 4 or 5 cards, and you just can't push it over as cleanly. Spread gets messy and it just doesn't look very nice in my opinion. So if you're gonna do the top cull, I'd probably just do one for this force, unless you can, get it down yourself where you can do multiple. But at that point, I'd probably just do it from the bottom. Another good idea is you can start with your force card. A lot of people like to do 5th from the top, right? So if I take the jack and put it 5th from the top, now I'm good to go. So now as I start spreading, I know it's the 5th card, and we do the middle cull, right? I contact the 4th card, get the middle card underneath, and I cull it. So now it's a lot less obvious, and it just kind of looks like you're spreading. You get your cull, and you keep going. Now, I mean, I'm not the greatest at this, so for me, I do pause kind of a little bit as I do it, and that one was pretty decent. And I have that card culled underneath. Now, you can use that method. It's pretty decent, but it does have, a few issues as well. Like, how do you get the force card to the 5th position? The easiest way is to obviously just count 1, 2, 3, 4 and place them there while the force card's on top. And that is another thing that you can totally just get away with in an off moment. Like, no one's going to question it. It just basically looks like you're shuffling. But why wouldn't you just do the top one at that point? So it's you kind of play with it, see what you like. That's why I recommend the bottom, right? It's easy to get the card on the bottom or the top, but with the top, it's a little bit questionable. So with the bottom, it's really easy to get there, and it's definitely not as questionable. So that's why I like to use that. Another method, the classic spread force as I've seen it, is after they do the spread and you ask them this one, you hit the spread against this pack, and then you show them like that. Now, a lot of magicians, including myself, don't love that one. I think it's okay, it's fine, it works. I've done it for a long time as well, and it's a good way of doing the spread force. Again, it's just like why would you say this one and then close the pack? And it feels more like a force because the spectator's like, well, why wouldn't you just go like this and show me? What's the point of doing this weird closed thing? And sometimes it's hard to follow. Like, if I show you this card and I go like this, to everyone it's not totally obvious that that bottom card is going to be the same one that was in the bottom at the spread. I know it seems kind of arbitrary, but that is the case sometimes. So I wanted to come up with a method that doesn't involve doing this weird close thing. And I've seen other good methods. One other method that I'll get into that's pretty decent, but they all involve you having to close the spread at some point. So I thought, why not come up with a spread force that looks natural and doesn't really involve you closing the spread like that. That just involves you kind of, you know, showing the card that they appear to have stopped at. The spread, obviously you can see what the size of it now, and as I bring it up, it does get a bit smaller, and that just, you know, comes with a bit of practice. You can keep the spread pretty big, but the reason is as you pull up and you push, a few other cards are going to close as well. You won't even notice that change, so it's totally fine. So the last method for doing this that I talked about, it's a method I saw Spidey do, and I liked it quite a lot. I think it's the best if you use a joker, and you'd probably want to have a justification for this in your trick if you're going to use it. And that's the kind of the thing I didn't like about it. Like, you know, why am I using the joker to pick the card? But nonetheless, it's a good little idea, so I'll talk about it. Basically, it's the same idea. You start with culling a card, so I would recommend, you know, you start with it at the bottom, cull the card. Now, you have them put the joker in the deck wherever they want. And then, once they put it in, obviously there's a card on top and a card on the bottom. You say, do you want the bottom card or the top card? Once they answer that, wherever they say, that's where you're going to slide the force card. So they say on top, you slide there. They say on the bottom, you slide there. It's really easy to distinguish between the top and the bottom because the joker kind of marks that position. So you do that, and then you close the pack, right? So if they said on the bottom, and put it on the bottom. Now you need a justification of why you just closed the deck. So his was, oh, you could have stopped here, you could have stopped at any of these cards, but you picked the one right underneath the joker. Right? So that's pretty good. Like, I think it's definitely better than this because there's no real justification for that. The reason I don't like it is because I think you need to come up with a reason to use the joker. Like, it doesn't really make sense to use any of the other cards unless you have a good story. So the joker is kind of a good one to use. And then you need that reason to close, and it's not bad to say, okay, you could have had any of these, but I just find with my version, you don't need any justification really for any of the moves that you do, and that's why I kind of developed it for that reason. So a last thing I just wanted to touch on was like the peek versus selection, as I mentioned. Definitely keep that in mind when you're doing this. It's better as a peek. Like overall, it seems a little more fair if you're doing a peek. So I use this a lot in like a mind reading kind of routine, right? You have them pick a card, you go, you show them, you say you got it, and you close the deck right away. Like, how fair does that look, right? Literally, I'm spreading, showing, closing. And it has total justification for why I keep this pack here, right? Because I'm trying to conceal that card from everyone else just so they see it. The selection's not quite as good, but definitely still very good, right? You go like this, you say, all right, you got it. They say yes. You take it and you place it down on the table and you proceed. All right, so that's my handling on the spread force. Another one of my favorite forces, really strong. And I think my touches to it are pretty helpful and make it seem a lot more fair. And it's my favorite way of performing the spread force. So practice culling. I might make another video going into a little bit more depth on culling because there is a lot you can do with it. To be honest, I don't use it a ton besides like this force and a few other little things, but it can be very useful, especially if you get very good at it. So practice that and then practice the replacement, right? That's definitely the most difficult part of this. You want to practice in front of a mirror and make sure that there's no flashing, and as you're bringing that card up, you don't kind of see you pushing that card up the spread, right? You just want to, as you bring it up, you want to make it look like it's been there the whole time. And then work on getting that square. So in my next video, I'm going to go over my personal favorite force. Really basic, but super strong if you know the right subtleties and how to use it, when to use it. So I'm very excited for that. So please like, subscribe, and stay tuned, and I'll catch you in the next video.